The Las Vegas Raiders finished the 2024 season with a 4-13 record and missed the playoffs for the third straight year.
They need to get something going right now, some rhythm.
It was a very underwhelming year for the Raiders, as there were a lot of positives to take away from the end of the 2023 season during the time period when Antonio Pierce was the interim head coach.
Are set to hire Antonio Pierce as their full-time head coach.
But after a surprising Week 2 win over the Ravens in 2024, and outside of Brock Bowers, pretty much everything fell apart for the Raiders. I wasn't high on this team entering the 2024 season, as I thought entering the year with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell as your top two quarterbacks was certainly a choice, and I definitely questioned what they had at running back entering the 2024 season too. They fired both Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco and brought in Pete Carroll and John Spytek to be the team's next head coach and GM. And full transparency, I do think the Raiders are one of the most improved teams heading into the 2025 NFL season.
Las Vegas Raiders select Ashton Genty.
But I have a few questions regarding the 2025 Raiders, and both things can be true. They did a lot to improve the roster, but what also has to be remembered is not every issue can be fixed in one off season. But I do think one thing for sure, and it's that the Raiders are going to be a nuisance. They're going to be a pain to play. And before we break down the 2025 Raiders, if you could like the video, I would really appreciate it. This helps tremendously, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing what the Raiders did in free agency, both in terms of who they brought in and who they lost. And one of the biggest things we have to note with the Raiders specifically is they have a new head coach and GM in Pete Carroll and John Spytek. Pete Carroll was, of course, the head coach of the Seahawks for over a decade, and John Spytek has been with the Bucs since 2016, has had several roles on his way to becoming the Raiders GM. The Raiders are in a tough situation as a franchise because they're in a division with the Chiefs, Chargers, and Broncos, and this is undoubtedly one of the best divisions in football. The Raiders were a very miserable team to watch at times in 2024, and one of the biggest things they needed this offseason was, of course, a quarterback. They finished 29th in offensive DVOA and 30th in passing DVOA last year, and the Raiders traded for former Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith. We'll discuss Geno in depth later in the video, but he was a player who revived his career under Pete Carroll during his time in Seattle. And I like this move a lot for the Raiders because of where they were last year from a quarterback standpoint and what this move represents, which of course is raising the floor of this team, which they desperately needed. Now, they did lose several guys in free agency, and while Trayvon Merrick, Robert Spillane, Divine Diablo, and Nate Hobbs may not be household names, collectively they played over 3,400 defensive snaps for the Raiders last year, and that's not easy to replace. And I do think Robert Spillane has been an underappreciated linebacker over the past few years, and Merrick has played over 1,000 snaps in 3 of his 4 years in the NFL, and being able to rely on him in the starting lineup was certainly a positive. I don't think Nate Hobbs was a particularly great player during his time in Vegas, but a problem the Raiders now have is not enough corner help. So while Nate Hobbs would not get confused with Patrick Surtain, another corner in their division, this can be a bigger loss than Raiders fans think because they don't have a lot to replace him with. And ultimately, I do think what's going to hold back the 2025 Raiders is their corner room. Now, they did bring back Malcolm Kuntz on a 1-year deal, and the biggest thing with the Raiders defense this year, and with bringing in Pete Carroll, is if they can stay healthy, and unfortunately that's a big if, then their defense has the potential to significantly outperform expectations because of how good their front four can be. Unfortunately, Malcolm Kuntz missed the entire 2024 season due to a knee injury, but this was a player who had 50 pressures in 2023, and to me is a really underrated football player. I really like this signing, or bringing back if you will, for the Raiders. They also brought in safety Jeremy Chin from the Commanders, guard Alex Kappa from the Bengals, also another player from the Bengals and linebacker Jermaine Pratt, and 2 corners in Eric Stokes from the Packers and Lonnie Johnson from the Panthers. I do like Jeremy Chin as a fit in this defense quite a bit, and think he can be a solid player for the Raiders, but outside of the Chin signing, I think a lot of these guys are going to end up being 1-year rentals and essentially placeholders for the roster John Spytek eventually wants to build. They were also in a tricky situation entering the 2025 offseason because everyone knew they needed to upgrade the roster, and specifically at the quarterback and running back position, but also had a limited amount of resources available as they have over $44 million in dead cap money in 2025, which ranks 10th in the NFL. I thought the Raiders did a solid job in terms of improving the roster within free agency while not handing out any bad contracts in the process, which was key from a first-year GM in John Spytek. Now, for the 2025 Raiders defense, I think this unit has one of the highest variances of outcomes of any defense in the NFL. I do think they are going to be improved in a few areas, some due to Pete Carroll being the head coach, and some almost by default. One big thing I do want to note with defensive coordinator Patrick Graham is this is his 4th year with the team, meaning he was here with Josh McDaniels, he was here with Antonio Pierce, and he's still here with Pete Carroll. And the reason we bring this up is because this did not happen by accident. I think Patrick Graham is a really good defensive coach that unfortunately hasn't had a lot to work with over the course of his career. Now, this defense finished 29th in turnovers forced last year as they forced just 13 in 17 games. The offense was, of course, a train wreck, and they also finished 29th in turnovers offensively last year, and when you have a team that's led by Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell with a minus 16 turnover margin, well, you shouldn't be surprised when you finish 4-13. Now, why I think this defense will improve is because they started on average at their 33-yard line, or 32.8-yard line to be specific, and that average starting field position ranked 31st in the NFL, and for clarity, I meant the opposing team's 32.8-yard line, but you get the point. They had terrible starting field position, which obviously over the course of a season is not going to help you, and in turn it's going to hurt your chances of succeeding as a unit. Max Crosby also played injured last year, and that much was evident when watching 2024 Raiders tape, and when you have Max Crosby playing hurt, as well as Christian Wilkins being done for the year just 5 games in, along with Malcolm Kuntz missing the entire year, well, it's going to be tough sledding. Max Crosby being healthy is obviously the most important thing for 2025, but having Crosby and Kuntz routinely get after the quarterbacks is something we saw in 2023, and Crosby finished 4th in Defensive Player of the Year voting that year, and Malcolm had 17 quarterback hits and 8 sacks. I would absolutely love to see this pair, along with Christian Wilkins, and hopefully a third-year breakout from Tyree Wilson, get after the quarterback in 2025, but there is a lot of uncertainty around Christian Wilkins at this point. There's a very real chance he misses the entire 2025 season, and I think there's a reason they brought in Leki Fotu in free agency and drafted not 1, but 2 defensive tackles on day 3 of the 2025 draft in Tonka Hemingway and JJ Pegues. Obviously, we hope Christian Wilkins plays, but even if he doesn't, this team should still be a lot better at getting after the quarterback this year than they were in 2024. Now, I will be honest, I'm not a Tyree Wilson guy. I hope he works out, but I think there is far too much inconsistency for him to be a good player for the Raiders and to prove that he was worth the number 7 overall pick. He's also in a new regime, which doesn't help him because they have no ties to him or incentive to keep him around, and I think there is a reality where we are closer towards the end of his time in Vegas than the beginning of his time in Vegas. Where I have a lot of concern with the Raiders' defense is the back 7. I really worry about Jermaine Pratt, Tommy Eichenberg, and Landon Roberts at linebacker. And for as much as I like the Raiders' front 4, and especially when healthy, meaning if they have Christian Wilkins, I am not a big fan of this linebacking unit. And inevitably, I think that's going to limit what they're going to be able to do. And this definitely applies to the secondary too, as Darian Porter and Eric Stokes as a starting corner duo, along with Darnay Holmes in the slot, is to me one of the more underwhelming corner trios in the entire NFL. I think Darnay Holmes is fine and can be a solid player, but Eric Stokes is a huge gamble, and he's played more than 10 games in just one of the past 3 seasons, and Porter is a 3rd-round rookie. Now, I like Darian Porter as a prospect quite a bit, but throwing him to the Wolves in Week 1 could be a recipe for disaster. He's certainly going to be tested, and for all of the improvements John Spytek and Pete Carroll made to the Raiders roster this offseason, my biggest concerns heading into 2025 are undoubtedly with the linebacking core and ultimately the secondary. The Las Vegas Raiders should have pretty substantial rookie impact, and it starts with the number 6 overall pick in the draft in Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. With a player like Ashton Jeanty, with a player like Malik Nabers last year, I start their conversations off with what really can I tell you about the said player that you already don't think or already don't know. Ashton Jeanty ran for over 2,000 yards during his final season at Boise State, and whenever you have a prospect like Ashton Jeanty or even like a Saquon Barkley back in 2018, you're going to have very lofty comparisons. Saquon was Barry Sanders back in 2018, and to me, Ashton Jeanty really reminded me a lot of LaDainian Tomlinson, who of course won an MVP with the Chargers during the mid-2000s. Those types of comparisons do not happen by accident, and I think Ashton Jeanty, why he reminds me so much of LT, was really the combination of power, speed, and ultimately his wiggle ability to really squeeze in between gaps that should not be there for most running backs, but as we know, Ashton Jeanty is not most running backs. In a lot of ways, he's one of one 1, and I would be kind of surprised if he's not a 1,000 yard back in year 1, not only due to his ability, but because of how much he is going to run the football. I think there's a very real chance in 2025 that Ashton Jeanty, and along with Pete Carroll's emphasis of wanting to run the football, that he comes in, rushes for over 1,000 yards, and also has double-digit rushing touchdowns. He's going to be an immediate impact player, and there's a reason that he is the favorite to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. Now, I don't want the entire Raiders rookie impact part to be about Ashton Jeanty, but just to give you an idea of how laughably high his numbers were last year, he averaged 6.9 yards per carry and had over 1,900 yards after contact, and averaged 5.25 yards again after contact, and forced 152 missed tackles. That's a stat per PFF, and for reference, Saquon Barkley during his best year at Penn State forced 72 missed tackles. Now, obviously, Ashton Jeanty had a lot more carries than Saquon had, and he obviously played at Boise State versus Penn State, so there is a little bit of a difference between where each player played and the volume that Ashton Jeanty received last year. But guys, he was an elite running back prospect, and again, I would be pretty surprised if he plays all 17 games if he's not a 1,000 yard back that doesn't have double-digit touchdowns. They selected receiver from TCU in the second round in Jack Bech, and I like Jack Bech as a prospect mainly because he's what I would call a floor-raising receiver. Jack Bech is going to be a good route runner, a high-effort run blocker, and a guy that it's hell or high water in 3rd and 7. If Brock Bowers is double-teamed, we can go to Jack Bech on a dagger route across the middle, and he's going to come down with the football. Jack Bech had, count him, 1 drop in 2024 with TCU, and again, he's a guy that should be a wide receiver too for not just 2025, but really a player that I think will have a limited ceiling that can be a wide receiver too throughout his entire career. Darian Porter, the third-round corner from Iowa State, to me is the definition of a boom or bust prospect and a guy that teams will target early and often just to see how much of a boom or bust guy he's going to be. Now, there's a couple of coverage stats that are going to certainly wow some people, as they wowed me when I was doing research in the pre-draft process, but there are also some negatives to his game. He was targeted 17 times last year and over 200 pass coverage snaps. In those 17 targets, these are per PFF, he allowed just 5 receptions for a grand total of 70 yards. He allowed 0 touchdowns and intercepted 3 passes. So when opposing quarterbacks target you and go 5 for 17, 70 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, that is an opposing passer rating of just 4.7 when targeted. And obviously Darian Porter is a very big corner, so there's some allure to a 6'3", 200-pound corner that runs a sub 4.40 that again has good ball tracking skills. The negatives, you may ask. Well, to me, he's not a good tackler, not a average tackler, but not a good tackler, as he missed over 20% of tackles that came his way in 2024, and he's also going to be 25 in January. And then also you have to factor in the competition level between who Iowa State was playing last year, and of course NFL receivers, which he's going to be playing every single Sunday this year. Where I personally stand right now on Darian Porter is I like the idea of Darian Porter, but I have a lot of questions about a guy who played less than 300 total defensive snaps prior to his age 23 season, and again, there's going to be quite the difference in talent level between who he was playing in 2024 versus who he will be playing in 2025, and again, the fact that he will be 25 years old in January. I think those are reasonable concerns, but positively, I will say that Darian Porter is in a great landing spot in a Pete Carroll coach defense, and I hope that he works out. I'll be the first to acknowledge that I'm wrong, that I was lower on him than I should have been if he works out for the Raiders. Where I thought the Raiders draft this year kind of went a little off the rails was after the Darian Porter selection, as they selected Caleb Rogers, an offensive lineman from Texas Tech, and Charles Grant from William & Mary. I did like the idea of Charles Grant, the lineman from William & Mary. I just thought that the value was a little rich, and I also thought the value was a little rich for Dante Thornton, the 4th-round receiver from Tennessee, but I think that there is a possibility with Dante Thornton that he's going to be this kind of MVS on steroids type player where he might have 7 catches throughout the entire 2025 season, but he may have 3 receiving touchdowns of 40 or more yards. Is that worth a 4th-round selection? We'll see in the long run, but I don't think Dante Thornton is going to be a guy that comes in and has 30 or 40 receptions as a rookie, and a guy that when it's 3rd and 7, we need a big play across the middle. Guess who we're going to? Dante Thornton. I don't think that's ever going to be his role, and I think he's going to be more of a gadget player or more of a deep ball player, and ultimately with a quarterback that has the arm talent Geno Smith does, there is a role for Dante Thornton in this offense. I don't want to act like there's not a role for Dante Thornton in this offense. I just kind of question the value with him specifically at the beginning of the 4th round. The two day 3 selections I like the most were J.J. Pegues, a defensive lineman from Ole Miss, and Tommy Mellott, a quarterback turned receiver from Montana. But the biggest thing with the 2025 Raiders rookie impact is hitting on Ashton Jeanty, which, again, if he stays healthy, the talent is there, and he's probably going to be a multiple-time 1,000-yard back. So I don't worry about Ashton Jeanty at all, as I think he was one of the safest prospects in the entire 2025 draft, and ultimately Jack Bech, too, who I think can be a 600-yard receiver year in and year out, if not more. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Bech eventually has a 1,000-yard season. Darian Porter, if he's going to succeed, it's going to be in a Pete Carroll zone coverage-based defense, because there were limited man-to-man reps during his time at Iowa State, as this was a player who had less than 1,000 career snaps, and that ultimately plays into my concern. But if the Raiders exit the 25 class in what is John Spytek's first draft as the general manager of the football team with 3 hits in Jeanty, Jack Bech, and Darian Porter, then that's a home run of a draft class, and that's what Raiders fans should be hoping for. The 2025 Raiders offense is going to look a lot different than their 2024 offense. I was not a fan of the Luke Getsy hire it was made. I was not a fan of the quarterback room. I was not a fan of the running back room. And honestly, heading into last year, I would have considered it a monumental win for the Raiders if they would have finished anywhere between really 18th and 22nd in terms of offensive output, because this unit was in a lot of ways set up for failure. They finished bottom 5 in countless offensive categories, whether it was EPA, DVOA, points forced, rushing yards per attempt, and you get the point. Now, with Chip Kelly, the team's new offensive coordinator, whenever you think of Chip, you may think of the fast-paced Eagles or the 49ers, and that we're going to have Geno Smith sprint up to the line with 27 seconds left on the play clock and hike the ball with 24 seconds left and really sprint down the field and hopefully have a 9-play, minute 45-second drive and get the defense right back out there. And in a lot of ways, that is setting everyone up for failure. But that's not who Chip Kelly is, and if you watch the 2024 Ohio State Buckeyes offense, Chip has really reinvented himself over the past couple of years. He is not the sprint-up coach, and we're going to do everything at a faster pace and hope that everything works out, because what has to be remembered with offenses now is, obviously aside from the fact that football players are human beings, you can't have an offense run 85 plays per game for 17 games, and then ultimately 4 more postseason games if you are hoping to win a Super Bowl. So Chip Kelly has learned a lot over the past several years, and if you watch the 2024 Ohio State offense, it looks absolutely nothing like what Chip Kelly's offense looked like anywhere from 10 to 12 years ago. Now, how this pertains to the 2025 Raiders offense is you're going to see a much better game plan on a week-to-week basis from Chip Kelly, at least I would think, than you would have saw from Luke Getsy and Scott Turner. And the 3 big changes that you're going to see from last year to this year between the offensive coordinator and going from Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell to Geno Smith and Sincere McCormick and Alexander Madison to Ashton Jeanty is going to provide invaluable dividends to the 2025 Raiders offense. And whenever you have Geno Smith, Ashton Jeanty, Jacoby Myers, and Brock Bowers all on the field at the same time, as well as a healthy Colton Miller, guys, this team is going to be a team that nobody wants to play. They are going to be a complete thorn in a lot of teams' sides, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Raiders go 3-3, maybe even 4-2 in the division play this year. The one big thing that worries me with the 2025 Raiders is, of course, the corner play, because ultimately I don't know how they're going to be able to hold up over the course of a 17-game season, but this offense legitimately has the talent to compete with anybody. Now, if you do ask the simple question of, hey, are the Raiders going to go into Highmark Stadium in Buffalo in January in the wildcard round and go toe-to-toe and beat the Bills? I personally would answer no to that question, but there's going to be games this year that the Raiders win that a lot of people simply don't think they're going to heading into the year. I do think the Raiders' offensive line is going to improve over the course of the 25 season, and I know Raiders fans have been up and down on Dylan Parham, a former third-round selection from the University of Memphis, but he is in a contract year, and I thought there were times throughout the 2024 season where he looked like a serviceable guard and a guy that could very easily play himself into a 1 or 2 year contract extension. Obviously, Colton Miller is Colton Miller, so from the left working in, we would have Colton Miller playing at a good level, Dylan Parham in a contract year, hopefully playing at a good level that he showed flashes of during the 24 season, and a player that I think will be a good breakout candidate in second-year player Jackson Powers Johnson. I absolutely love JPJ during his time in Oregon, and I think he is a good breakout candidate for a reason, and it's because how high of a floor he had to begin with as a collegiate prospect. JPJ, to me, was a very clean player. I didn't see many weaknesses in his game, and I was surprised he fell as far as he did during the 2024 draft, and I thought the Raiders were huge 2024 draft winners for coming out of the first 2 days with both Brock Bowers and Jackson Powers Johnson, and obviously we saw that throughout the course of the 24 season with Brock Bowers, but I think 2025 will be the year that Jackson Powers Johnson emerges as a top 5 or 10 center over the course of the next several years. Now, for as several high-floor players as the Raiders have on their offense, whether it's Geno, Ashton Jeanty, Brock Bowers, Colton Miller, Jacoby Myers, whoever, I really do worry about Alex Kappa and DJ Glaze on the right side of the offensive line, as both players allowed 50 or more pressures in 2024. Kappa was obviously with the Bengals, and Glaze was, of course, with the Raiders. Chip Kelly has to know this entering the year, and if he doesn't do his part, and he doesn't set the guys up with double team help, with chip help, whatever the case may be, to send extra protection to the right side of the offensive line, then I think there would be a reality where Geno Smith would, in a lot of ways, relive 2024 in 2025 with the Raiders because of the lack of help from the offensive line. The Raiders' offensive potential is pretty considerable entering 2025, and I think they should be a top 13 or 14 unit really at worst, and this is of course assuming everyone stays healthy. It's not unreasonable for Geno Smith to throw for 4,000 yards this year. It's not unreasonable for Ashton Jeanty to run for 1,200 yards as well as 10 plus rushing touchdowns, and if we saw Brock Bowers go for over 1,100 yards with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell throwing him the football last year, along with a better quarterback and improved offensive coordinator, I don't want to say that we're going to expect him to have a 1,500 or 1,600 type yard season from the tight end position, but why couldn't he repeat the same level of success that he had last year? Because the targets certainly should not be an issue, knowing how good of a player he is to begin with. The Raiders, to me, are the definition of a dark horse team entering the 2025 season because there's not a lot expected out of them. They finished 6 full games behind the Broncos last year, who finished 3rd in the division. And when you look at the AFC West, you have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, and a team that's won 3 Super Bowls in the past 6 years. You have Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert, a team that looked promising during the 2024 season, and I know their season obviously ended the way that it did, but you also have the Broncos, who went to the playoffs in Bo Nix's rookie season, and a team whose future looks pretty bright too. And then you have the Raiders, a team who finished a full 6 games back, and a team that brought in a former Super Bowl champion head coach who had only won 1 playoff game in his final 7 seasons in Seattle. And if you guys remember the 2019 wildcard win over the Eagles, it was in a game Carson Wentz got hurt. That was Pete Carroll's final playoff win as the Seahawks head coach, and that's who the Raiders brought in. There's also never any context provided around Geno Smith as to why he wasn't that good of a player in 2024, and it was a lot of the time because Geno was forced to make chicken salad out of chicken feces. But I'll be honest, guys, the Raiders are a team that nobody is going to want to play this year, and a team that I personally can't wait to watch play. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps tremendously, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.